1975 saw the withdrawal of US forces from Saigon and the end of the Vietnam War. It was the year Microsoft started in the software business. BMW introduced the 3 Series, Jaguar launched the XJS, and Ferrari unveiled the 308 GTB. Paul Simon had a hit with 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, and Bruce Springsteen released Born to Run. The car industry was in financial chaos thanks to an energy crisis, but in Formula 1, creativity was booming. 20 different designs from 17 constructors would compete during the season, all but 2 of them powered by the Ford Cosworth V8 engine. Many of the teams had little hope of success, but others would count themselves championship contenders. But first, they would have to beat the reigning champions, Emerson Fittipaldi and McLaren. The first Grand Prix of the season was heralded by a colourfully dressed Argentinian band. It seemed they were playing for just one man, local hero Carlos Reutemann. He was third in practice, beaten by Jean-Pierre Jarier, who put his new Shadow DN5 on pole, and Brabham teammate Carlos Pace. Things looked good for the French driver, but on the warm-up lap his transmission failed and he was unable to start. This left Reutemann with a clear track ahead of him, and he shot in front of Pace. The pair of Brabhams were followed by Lauda, Hunt, Emerson Fittipaldi, Peterson, Regazzoni, Dupaille, Andretti, Mass and Scheckter, who had touched at the start, Brambilla, Ickx, Donoghue, Price, Lafitte, Stommelen and Hill. Wilson Fittipaldi tailed the pack in the new Copa car, taking part in its first race. The Brazilian team's introduction to Formula 1 was not to be a happy one. The elder Fittipaldi brother lasted only 12 laps before losing control of the car and hitting the guardrail. Fortunately, he was uninjured. Things went better for his brother. When Pace spun out of second spot, Hunt took over the place before pressuring his way past Reutemann to take the lead. After a couple more laps, Emerson got past 2, and after tailing Hunt for 10 laps or so, he forced the Englishman into an error. This gained him a lead he was to maintain until the checkered flag. Hunt and Reutemann joined him on the podium. Once again, the Brazilian Grand Prix was held in sweltering heat, and once again the fire brigade provided a cooling shower for the crowd. Their overheated state wasn't just due to the sun. Their favourite, Emerson Fittipaldi, was reigning world champion and had just won the first race of the year. For Sao Paulo, this was festival time. For others on the pit lane, like Niki Lauda, Carlos Reutemann, Mark Donoghue and team owner Roger Penske, Jean-Pierre Jarier and designer Tony Southgate, this was another day at the office. For Wilson Fittipaldi and his Brazilian-sponsored car, it was much more. Graham Hill had the pressure of running his own team, and Mauro Forghieri had the pressure of running a team for Enzo Ferrari. Both had it easy compared to the pressure the thousands of fans put on the Brazilian drivers. Carlos Pace, in his hometown, knew they were expecting much from him. Ronnie Peterson and Lotus were under pressure too. The Swede was 16th on the grid, a long way behind Jarier, who was on pole. Emerson Fittipaldi was next to him, and the local driver in his well-proven McLaren had reason to feel confident. Reutemann led from the start, but the new Shadow was obviously quick, and Jarier was making the most of its speed. The Argentinian kept ahead of the Frenchman at first, but after 4 laps, Jarier took over first place and established a gap ahead of Reutemann. He was followed by Pace, Regazzoni, Lauda, Scheckter, Emerson Fittipaldi and Depailler. The Interlagos track was proving hard on tyres, and Reutemann was just one driver that had to stop for fresh rubber. Jarriers held out, but his engine didn't, and he was forced to retire with just 8 laps to go. His departure left Pace in the lead, and at the flag, the crowd went wild to see one of their own local boys take his first Grand Prix win. Emerson Fittipaldi was second, so the carnival atmosphere was complete. The fine weather continued as the Grand Prix circus moved on to South Africa and the Kyalami circuit near Johannesburg. However, the atmosphere was far from sunny in the John Player camp. The aging 72 was now outclassed, and neither Peterson nor Ickx had scored a point so far this year. Jacques Lafitte was settling into a Williams team that was now building its own cars. Clay Regazzoni and ace mechanic Giulio Borsari were happy, for Ferrari had a new car for this race. Jochen Massa's result in Brazil gave him confidence, a quality lacking at BRM, where Bob Evans was the new driver. Patrick Depailler knew that here, more than anywhere else, he was number 2 to local boy Jody Scheckter, although number 2 at Tyrrell was still a good place to be. Lord Hesketh's mother was at Kyalami to enjoy the sun and see how the family Formula 1 team was progressing. The answer was well, for the British team was very professional, despite its happy-go-lucky facade. As Carlos Reutemann went out to practice, there was a new face in the pit lane. Lella Lombardi was the first woman driver in Formula 1 since Maria Teresa De Filippis in 1959. Lombardi qualified on the last row of the grid, which was headed by the Brabham team with Pace on pole. Lauda and Scheckter were next, and on the third row, Depailler was ahead of Andretti's Parnelli. As the cars dashed towards Crowthorne Bend, Scheckter managed to split the two Brabhams. By lap 3, he had passed Pace and taken a lead that he was to hold for the rest of the race. Graham Hill, who had crashed in practice and damaged his car beyond repair, was an unwilling spectator in the pits, watching as Rolf Stommelen drove the remaining Embassy Lola in a steady race that would see him finishing just out of the points. Scheckter was driving a faultless race. The South African had crashed heavily in practice, but now he was making no mistakes. To the delight of the Tyrrell team, Depailler was backing him up perfectly, holding third place behind Reutemann. Behind the leading group, but not out of touch with it, the two new Ferraris with their radical transverse gearboxes were running well, if not spectacularly, on their first outing. Not so encouraging was the performance of Fittipaldi's McLaren. He made no less than 6 pit stops for minor adjustments, and although he kept going to the end, he finished last. A win for Scheckter was exactly what the Kyalami crowd wanted, and the result was also encouraging in terms of the World Championship. 3 different winners in 3 races and no points for Fittipaldi kept everything nice and level as the circus headed for Europe. In the race for constructors' points, it was the same, with 3 winners in 3 races. The paddock area for the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona, set up in a sports stadium in the park at Montjuic, was strangely silent. The drivers, who should have been practicing, were all in casual clothes. The reason was a dispute between the Grand Prix Drivers Association and the organisers over safety. The circuit had been surrounded by crash barriers, but when they were checked, it was found that many had not been fixed properly. Some had not even been bolted into place. The drivers, with Emerson Fittipaldi taking a leading position, had refused to race. They had a strong case and their position looked firm. During meetings between the drivers and the organisers, the team mechanics went out to check the entire length of the circuit barriers. Where it was required, they fixed them. Throughout the period set aside for the practice sessions, groups of drivers talked amongst themselves, with their team bosses, and with the increasingly desperate organisers, who could see their investment in the race coming to nothing. Finally, the organisers threatened to lock the cars and transporters inside the stadium, seizing them for breach of contract. The teams could not afford for this to happen, and after a drivers' meeting, the race took place after just one practice session. Making his point, Fittipaldi drove round slowly before pulling into the pits. To make things worse, Rolf Stommelen crashed heavily and his car killed 4 people. The race was stopped before the full distance had been run. There was a race and there were results, but it was not a day racing could be proud of. After the fiasco in Spain, it was good for the image of racing that the next event was the most glamorous of the season, the Round the Houses Spectacular in Monaco. To show us the details of this classic circuit, our chauffeur is Emerson Fittipaldi, following teammate Jochen Mass round a track that has changed little since 1929. From the start line, the first corner is Saint-Devote, always difficult in the melee of the start. Then it's up the hill towards Monte Carlo, climbing steadily up towards the boutiques and the gardens of the Hotel de Paris. This sharp left-hander takes us into Casino Square. Then there's a 90-degree right round the flower beds to head downhill past the tip-top bar and into the Mirabeau hairpin. Then there's the even tighter hairpin that was once the station. Now it's a hotel. Two sharp rights take us onto the seafront and into the tunnel, dark, noisy and disconcerting for the drivers. Then it's a run along the rocks over the harbour before the sharp left-right of the chicane. Now we're almost at sea level, running alongside the harbour and into the fast left-hander at the Tabac. So far, this is all the original course, but now we're reaching the newest section, the left-right, right-left, round the swimming pool. Then a gentle left-hander is followed by the succession of varying right-handers that take us round the Rascasse restaurant and off along the slightly curved section past the pits and on to the start and finish. Colin Chapman and Ronnie Peterson were checking practice times, as were Carlos Reutemann and Bernie Eccleston.
No. Here, the first is Graham, the second one was finished. Yeah, but 1, 2, 3, 4.
In the shadow pit, Jean-Pierre Jarier was preparing to qualify, as was Carlos Pache at Brabham. Lella Lombardi was not out of place. She'd earned her position in the March factory team, but she was still learning about F1. Jochen Mass had won in Spain, but the race was only worth half points. He still wanted a real win. In the days before pit crew radios, it was difficult for Ken Tyrrell and Jody Scheckter to communicate. Niki Lauda, however, had no problems communicating with the press, although Jacques Ickx had little to say about the outdated Lotus 72 he was driving. At Ferrari, Clay Regazzoni was finding his new 312T to be a very good car. Depailler was settling in well at Tyrrell, happy in a team that was like a family. After fine weather for practice, race day turned into one of those nasty days that can happen in Monaco, with steady rain falling. The crowd needed their waterproofs. Although the rain was subsiding as Prince Rainier drove Princess Grace round the track to take their places in the royal box, the cars were all equipped with wet weather tyres for the race. Lauda was on pole, with shadow new boy Tom Price in a dazzling second place. Jarier was third, maintaining the Shadow's good qualifying record, and he was followed by Peterson, performing well in the outdated Lotus 72. For safety reasons, just 18 cars were allowed to start. As the cars formed up on the grid, there were last-minute discussions, mainly on the subject of tyres. The rain was definitely getting lighter, but no one was ready to take the gamble of starting on slicks. Now that there was just one tyre supplier, Goodyear, the choice was more limited. There were no clever intermediate patterns that would have been perfect for these conditions. It was wets or dries, and nothing in between. With the spinning wheels turning the rain on the track to steam, the field shot off the line. With the problems in Spain in mind, the grid had been staggered with wide gaps between the cars, but things still got close as the field went into Saint-Devote. As the cars streamed up the hill, Price had already lost the second place he had held on the grid to Jarier, and through Casino Square and down to the Mirabeau, it was obvious that Brambilla in the Orange March was trying hard. The fast corners through Casino Square were relatively trouble-free. The difficulty lay at the next hairpin, where more than 450 horsepower was being put down on a wet surface where traffic had slowed almost to a standstill. Brambilla and Price touched, causing damage that would eventually lead to them both retiring. Others had problems too, but not Lauda and Jarier. However, the French driver was soon to learn that the secret of success at Monaco is never to get over-enthusiastic and to always drive with absolute precision. As Jean-Pierre chased Lauda into the Tabac turn, he was to fail on both counts. After two-thirds of a lap, his race was over. With Jarier out, Peterson took up the pursuit of the leading Ferrari. It was a chase that was to last throughout the first third of the 75-lap race. The John Player Special was at its best here, on a circuit where speeds were limited and Peterson's driving skills weren't outweighed by the car's shortcomings. Behind the leading pair, the field was led by Price. He was followed by Scheckter, Fittipaldi, Pace, Hunt, Depailler, Andretti, Reutemann, Ickx, Mass, Watson, Donoghue, and Australia's Alan Jones in only his second Grand Prix. Unlucky Andretti soon hit trouble. He explains what went wrong.
What happened? An oil pipe burst. For some reason or other. Oil pipe broke and then it caught fire.
Where did it happen? Where were you, remember?
I don't know, about nine.
No, where were you on the race course? Did you have far to come?
Oh, I did a couple of laps. I could smell it. And, but, you know, I was trying to shrug it off as long as I could, you know.
Well,
Lauda had now covered some 24 laps in the lead, and the track surface was dry enough to make the use of slick tyres not only possible, but also desirable. Up and down pit lane, the managers began to call their drivers in. James Hunt was the first to change, bringing the Hesketh in after only 17 laps. The rest of the drivers stayed out longer, until between laps 21 and 25, when the pits were as crowded as the casino on a Saturday night. Most of the cars lost laps. Efficient work on the part of the Ferrari team meant Lauda retained the lead. After the stops, and with all the cars on slicks, battle recommenced. Lauda was ahead, followed by Fittipaldi and Pace. Hunt and Depailler were fighting over 6th place. Fighting a little too hard, in fact. Hunt was ready to get out of his car, but he wasn't ready to leave the scene of the accident. He was determined to let Depailler know what he thought of him. More importantly, he wasn't going to let the marshals stop him passing on his message to the Tyrrell driver next time he came round. Unfortunately, the marshals weren't aware of the depth of his resolve. Having made his feelings clear, the British driver started the long walk back to the pits. Meanwhile, Lauda continued his majestic progress to the finish, where the checkered flag and a rapturous greeting from his team were awaiting him. He took the flag a little under 3 seconds ahead of Emerson Fittipaldi and left the champagne duties to the man from Magneti Marelli, who was not exactly an expert in either spraying it or drinking it. Fortunately, Nicky handled the interview with Jackie Stewart himself.
Wonderful victory. Congratulations. You must be very, very happy.
I'm really pleased because I can tell you it wasn't easy.
Hard work.
Hard work, especially in the beginning in the rain. Ronnie was pushing hard, I didn't expect. And after drying out, the car was all right.
Well, you seem very calm. Everything went well. A wonderful pit stop. That must have frightened you, the thought of coming into the pits when you were leading.
Yes, it's right, but I'm really happy about our mechanics because they are very well trained. As you know, they did a lot of sport car racing, so they did a very good job.
This was proving to be an excellent start to the season. 4.5 races and 5 different winners. So far, no one was showing as a championship favourite. Unlike Monaco, in Belgium, the rain fell during practice. Nobody likes to go out on a wet track, so the pits were full of drivers sheltering under umbrellas and just generally killing time. It was 2 years since the race had been held here at Zolder, and since then the circuit had been slightly modified. Even so, the drivers were showing no eagerness to go out and check out the new lines. It was better to chat to friends, just watch the world go by, or try to make the sun come out by the power of positive thinking. One driver that didn't have to go out was Graham Hill. Monaco had been his last race, and sadly for the man who had won 5 races in the Principality, he'd failed to qualify. Now he was concentrating on managing his team, which now had its own cars and drivers Tony Bryce and Francois Migo. When practice finally took place, it saw Niki Lauda take pole ahead of Carlos Pace. Third was Vittorio Brambilla, showing excellent speed in the factory march. Regazzoni was next, followed by Price and Reutemann. At the start, the first 2 rows of the grid became one as the field dived into the first corner, with the 2 Ferraris losing out to Pace and a hard-charging Brambilla. Pace led initially, but only for a lap before Brambilla thrust himself into the lead. Jarier spoilt his chances with a spin, but the Italian March driver was making the most of his time in the spotlight. He had a reputation to make, and he was determined to stay ahead as long as he could. Jackie Ickx went into the catch fencing after a brake problem. Peterson suffered brake failure too. It was not proving to be a good year for John Player Lotus. Brambilla kept ahead of Lauda as best he could, but finally he had to give way to a Ferrari that was possibly now the best car in the field. In time, Regazzoni also got past the March, whose brakes were not up to the hard work Brambilla was giving them. He was forced to retire after 54 of the 70 laps. Lauda, however, was not to be displaced from the head of the field. He finished almost 20 seconds ahead of Scheckter, with Reutemann third. The Ferrari driver's win put him ahead in the championship, with 23 points to Fittipaldi's 21. The combination of a tighter team organisation under Luca di Montezemolo and the new 312T car developed by Mauro Forghieri was paying major dividends for Maranello. In previous years, the Scandinavian Raceway at Anderstorp had been a welcome stop on the Grand Prix trail for Ronnie Peterson. This year, however, the Swede had only 3 championship points to his name from a 4th place in Monaco. This weekend was unlikely to provide a happy homecoming. It was happy for Vittorio Brambilla. The Italian was in his first season of Formula 1 and he was taking March into areas the team had not visited since 1970. Here he was on pole, ahead of Depailler, Jarier, Reutemann, Lauda and Pace. 5 of the top 6 had so far qualified well on a number of occasions. Lauda, on the other hand, had qualified well and won, so he had the advantage. Brambilla led for the first 15 laps, but a half-shaft problem that was to eventually lead to the Italian's retirement allowed Reutemann to get past. The Brabham driver had climbed steadily through the field, but Lauda's progress was equally effective. The two had started 5th and 6th on the grid, and they moved to the head of the pack in formation. It looked as though Reutemann, who had led since the 17th lap, had the race in the bag. However, with just 10 laps of the 80 to go, he had to give way to Lauda as the Brabham's rear tyres started to go off. Lauda had selected a harder compound at the start, and he had a trouble-free run right through to the flag. It was his 3rd win in a row, and to make Ferrari's day even more complete, Regazzoni finished 3rd after starting a disappointing 12th. Fittipaldi finished a lowly 8th out of the points, so Lauda's championship hopes were helped considerably. Having won the past 3 races, Ferrari was the team under pressure as practice for the Dutch Grand Prix began. The pressure didn't show, however, and when Niki Lauda came in after setting fastest time in practice, his conversation with team manager Luca di Montezemolo was far from stressed.
Okay, what can we do? Check after. We see after.
Okay, congratulations. Listen.
Clay Regazzoni raised the team's spirits even higher when he joined Lauda on the first row with a time just a couple of tenths slower than that set by Niki. Only 2 years ago, Ferrari had missed the Dutch Grand Prix because their new car was so uncompetitive. Chief engineer Mauro Forghieri had been out of favour at Maranello, but he was given the job of sorting out the design and putting the team back on track with a car that could go up against the other top constructors. Luca di Montezemolo had been brought in as manager at the beginning of 1974, and from the 3rd race of this season, Forghieri's new design, the 312T, had given Ferrari the weapon it needed. The turnaround was now complete. All that was needed was to maintain the momentum. Di Montezemolo was young, aristocratic, and placed at Ferrari by the management of Fiat, which now owned the firm. Enzo Ferrari played little part in the running of the race team now, but it was certainly in good hands. Di Montezemolo was one of the new breed of university-trained managers, and his calm and logical approach to running the team had brought great benefits. Race day brought rain and the probability of pit stops. Teddy Mayer, aided by Denny Hulme, briefed Fittipaldi on what to do.
If you're going to come in, be sure to tell us. Be sure to signal before you come in. Right.
Just in case.
And when you come in,
Okay, I think in the next lap I come in or 2 laps, that's fine.
2 laps
I try
if you
to do
can.
2 laps.
Yes.
If I not can do 2 laps, I come in the next one. I try for 2, right?
Right.
After my first time.
Right.
Try to give me 1 up.
Yes.
Only if I really have emergency, then I come in.
Right. Now the other thing, when you come in in neutral, out of gear, right? Yeah. And put on the brake, on the front brake while you're stopped.
Boys can't pull the wheel off.
Hold the brakes on, right?
With the brakes on when you're sitting here. And the engine, keep it running like that.
But in neutral.
But in neutral, and don't go till we tell you, till Alistair tells you. Is it Alistair that signals him? Yeah. No matter what, even if you think it's ready, don't go until he tells you.
As the cars went out to the grid, they were all on wet tyres, but the forecast was that the rain would stop. Behind the 2 Ferraris were Hunt and Scheckter, followed by Reutemann and Fittipaldi. Even on the grid, the McLaren setup was being modified.
We went down 2 turns on the rear ride height.
What, for these tyres?
No, just because we thought we were going to switch to the other ones. Understeering a lot, Emerson.
Yes, in the first one.
We better go up that 2 turns in the rear ride height, too.
David's got a quick lift over there.
In the days before pit stops were an integral part of racing, few teams had the time or inclination to practice tyre changes. Ferrari did, however. He must have given Lauda and Regazzoni extra confidence as they rolled onto the grid. At the start, Scheckter seized the advantage over Regazzoni and grabbed second place behind Lauda. The Swiss Ferrari driver was condemned to drive in the same curtain of spray as the rest of the field. Out on the track, however, the spray was not as bad, and the field was able to stay close to the leaders without driving blind. It wasn't long, however, before the rain stopped and the tyre changes began. Lauda was among the last to change. He stayed out for a further 7 laps after James Hunt had been the first driver to peel off into the pits. The British driver's decision had been a masterstroke, for after all the cars had been in to change, he found himself in the lead. Lauda made quick progress through the field after his stop, but he could make no impression on the Hesketh, although he got very close. Hunt could smell his first Grand Prix win, and he was not going to give it up to anyone, not even the World Championship leader. As he took the flag, Hunt's joy was obvious, as was that of his team. Lord Hesketh never made any secret of the fact that he was in racing for fun, and one thing was certain: plenty of champagne would flow in the team hotel that night. Lauda's second place kept him ahead in the title race, and Regazzoni's third helped Ferrari's hopes in the Constructors' Championship. But you got the impression that the smiles of Lauda and Regazzoni were as much for the popular young British driver as they were for their own success. All the flags were flying bravely, but none more bravely than the tricolour as the Grand Prix circus arrived in the south of France. This was one of the few 1975 races where the sun was almost guaranteed, which was a good thing because the local scenery looked better in sunshine. Once again, Lauda was on pole with Jody Scheckter alongside him and Hunt, Jarier, Pache and Price behind. Apart from Price, whose shadow lost its clutch, it was a good start, particularly good for Lauda, who took an immediate lead. At this point in the season, with podium finishes in the last 4 races, Lauda was expected to do well. But nothing is ever certain in racing, and Chief Engineer Forghieri hovered nervously around his timekeepers. Lauda seemed to be untroubled at the head of the pack, but as the race developed, 2 drivers started to challenge him. They were Hunt and Mass, and they had been unable to catch the Austrian in the early laps because they'd been held up behind Scheckter. He had an extra powerful Cosworth engine in his Tyrrell and was fast along the circuit's long straight, but the car's road holding was poor in the twisty sections. When Hunt and Mass finally got past, they closed on the Ferrari. This caused Ingegnere Forghieri even more concern, but at least he was sharing it with Lord Hesketh. As the team bosses fretted, Lauda circulated regularly at the head of the field, although the Briton and the German McLaren driver were pushing him harder and harder. As the final lap was signalled, the 3 cars were less than 3 seconds apart. But neither of the pursuing pair could make that final push that would see them past the Ferrari. It was exciting stuff for the fans, and it was a satisfying race for the drivers. Mass, usually in the shadow of Fittipaldi, who finished 4th, was able to show what he could do. Hunt and the Hesketh crew were rapidly proving that under the boys' club veneer of the team was a very efficient racing operation. For Ferrari, it was an excellent result. Although Regazzoni's engine had died after only 6 laps, Lauda had registered his 4th victory in the last 5 races, and in the 5th he had finished 2nd. The world title was now a realistic ambition. In the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari could also look forward with confidence. This win meant it now had an advance of 14 points over second-placed Brabham. This is a site that's gone forever. Dean Delamont, head of competitions at the RAC, gives the drivers in the British Grand Prix at Silverstone a safety briefing in the open air and over the circuit's public address system.
The yellow flag is out there for a purpose, and there is no passing in the yellow flag area. Now you know also that we're going to keep this race running. I hope it doesn't rain. I'm looking at the clouds, but if it rains, the race will continue. It will be your decision when you come in and change your tyres. This is an agreement made possible because of the new pits at Silverstone, which give you the space to change tyres during the race.
Not everyone takes the headmaster's speech seriously.
Come into the pit.
Any more of that, Mass, and you'll be staying behind afterwards, and try to stay awake, Regazzoni. Among the important people at the race was Walter Hayes, the dynamic Ford PR boss who had made the Ford Cosworth engine a reality.
It's always been a great circuit for Fittipaldi, is this one?
Going very well to come.
Well, no, it's a good circuit. You liked it, you always said you liked it. You see, up to you now.
Fittipaldi may have liked Silverstone, but Tom Price liked it more after taking a shock pole position for Shadow. Pace was alongside him, with Lauda and Regazzoni behind. But on the dash towards Copse Corner, the Welshman lost out to Pace and Regazzoni was snapping at his heels. 26 cars started the race, but one famous driver was missing. Jackie Ickx had left John Player Lotus, dissatisfied with his car. As the field negotiated the narrow new chicane at Woodcote Corner, the fans could mourn the fact that BRM had also disappeared. It was an ironic twist that this should happen at Silverstone, where 24 years previously, BRM had entered its first Grand Prix. Looking past the pits from Copse Corner, it was clear how similar the designs had become, with practically every car using a tall, slim airbox to force fresh air to the engine. There was, however, still a difference of opinion among designers about slim monoplane front wings or an all-enveloping shape. As the raindrops started to appear on the camera lens, the rain Dean Delamont had feared arrived. Scheckter was one of the many drivers who changed to rain tyres, a decision which conditions on the pit straight seemed to justify. Fittipaldi's pit crew, however, were more relaxed, for Emerson stayed out on slicks. Not that the McLaren mechanics had nothing to do. A collision with Regazzoni meant Mass needed a new nose. When the sun came out again, Fittipaldi was well placed, with only James Hunt, who had also stayed on slicks, ahead of him. But then a broken exhaust caused the Hesketh to lose power, and Emerson moved into the lead. Then it started to rain again, and this time the McLaren driver decided to be the first of the front runners to change tyres. He came in on lap 56 and made his second superb tactical decision of the afternoon. While he was in the pits, a torrential rainstorm had hit just a small part of the circuit. Club Corner had a stream flowing across it. Lauda drove through the pits without changing his tyres, but other drivers weren't so lucky. As an official waved Emerson to a halt at the start and finish line, others were disentangling no less than 6 cars from the catch fencing on the flooded corner. Officially, the race had 12 more laps to run, but so many cars had gone off that the stewards called a halt. The results were decided on the positions at the end of the 56th lap, which was fortunate for Pache, Scheckter, Hunt and Donoghue, who took 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th positions. They were fortunate because they'd all spun off on lap 57. For Emerson, the main consideration as he sat in the car was not how he had won, but how to get some shelter. Mechanic Joe Ramirez dashed out to help, but the solution came from a friendly marshal with a flag. Afterwards, Emerson explained things to commentator Barry Gill.
How did you make your decision? James Hunt, refused to come in and stayed on dry tyres. When did you decide that it had to be a wet tyre race?
When I saw in the sky a heavy rain coming and started on the backside of the circuit, and I knew that part would be very wet to the next lap.
Once again, the German Grand Prix was at the Nürburgring, where modifications to the track had satisfied the drivers' fears about the long circuit's safety. After losing out on points in Britain, Ferrari was keen to get back into the scoring positions. Lauda's pole, with the first ever ring qualifying time of under 7 minutes, was a good start to the weekend. Although Pache, second on the grid, was well placed as the field set off round the pits complex on their first lap, by the time the cars came back to the finish of that lap, Depailler was second to Lauda. This remained the position for 9 laps, when Depailler's suspension broke and Reutemann took over second spot. Then, on lap 10, the Ferrari pits were galvanised into action as Lauda came in, his left front tyre in tatters. Reutemann was now in the lead, and that's the way it stayed until the flag fell. Lauda salvaged 3rd place and 4 points, but there was a welcome surprise when Jacques Lafitte took 2nd place for the permanently underfunded team of Frank Williams. It was the first podium finish for the French driver and the British team, while Lauda had reason to smile as he extended his lead in the World Championship. Fittipaldi, who failed to finish because of a suspension failure, was gradually slipping out of contention. As the grid formed up for the Austrian Grand Prix, the starting procedure was being explained to the drivers. Safety was on everybody's mind after Mark Donoghue had been killed in an accident in practice. Niki Lauda was on pole for his home Grand Prix. Emerson Fittipaldi was third.
What's up, 10 seconds. And then the 10 seconds, he goes after 10 seconds. Up and then he goes down.
He holds it there.
There. Down. He doesn't go, no, not this. That way.
In seventh spot was Patrick Depailler, so Prince Metternich, one of the most senior motorsport administrators in Europe, switched to French.
Et après, il regarde 10 secondes, il baisse le... Il va comme ça. D'en haut en bas.
But Brabham boss Bernie Ecclestone had other worries. Looking at the sky, it was clear that the problem that had dogged so many races in 1975, heavy rain, was about to strike again. Bernie expressed his wishes to local officials forcibly.
Yes, it will now come, sure. Let's get all the cars back into the pits and change tyres. All the cars back into the pits and change the tyres. Come on.
Good sense prevailed, and as the grid formed up again, everyone was prepared for rain. That was a good thing, because conditions were atrocious, and they showed no signs of improving. Lauda was the early leader, but after 14 laps he was passed by Hunt. In turn, the Briton was passed by Vittorio Brambilla, who had made steady progress from 8th on the grid. Half distance passed, and with no sign of a let-up in the rain, the organisers decided to end the race 2 laps later, with 29 of the scheduled 54 completed. Brambilla was so surprised to see the checkered flag that he half spun as he crossed the line and bounced off the Armco. Marshals and pit crews signalled other drivers to slow down, and the race ended in chaos, with visibility and adhesion both at the minimum. Half points were awarded to Brambilla and the rest of the top 6, so Lauda, who had dropped to 6th with no grip from his tyres, therefore finished with just half a point added to his score. But with 51.5 to Fittipaldi's 33, it meant that he could go to Italy in a position to win the championship. There's no place like Monza for the Ferrari team and its followers. And with Niki Lauda in a position to tie up the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, team manager Luca Di Montezemolo was justly enthusiastic when Lauda took pole position.
Listen. Oh, fantastic. Listen, I remember this in Zandvoort last year.
Even with the press, the mood was light-hearted.
If he gets publicity, he even tells the important Ferrari secrets to him. I tell you, instead they talk about cars, about time, why don't we talk about girls now? Yes, I prefer.
As the cars were pushed out to the grid, the eyes of thousands of Italian fans watched their beloved red Ferraris. Drivers like Reutemann were little else than extras in this show, for Regazzoni had fulfilled his duties and taken second place on the grid. The hopes of the tifosi were therefore at their highest. The tensions in the Ferrari camp were showing a little on the grid, but the team had a new efficiency about it, and even the panics were controlled. Fittipaldi could probably feel his championship slipping away as the Ferrari mechanics started Lauda's car. The start was far from perfect as drivers in the second half of the grid anticipated the flag. The only casualty was Brambilla, whose clutch had died. Another retirement came at the first chicane. Andretti had to pull out after tangling with Tony Bryce, the young driver that had joined Graham Hill's team. The leaders had escaped, however, and at the end of the first lap, it was the 2 Ferraris, Regazzoni ahead, in the lead. For Mauro Foghieri and Luca Di Montezemolo, the 2 men that had masterminded the team effort that had put Lauda on the threshold of a world title, the pressures of the pits must have been enormous. Out on the track, however, Regazzoni was the man in the spotlight, holding a confident first place ahead of his teammate. Constantly passing between the pit wall, the timekeepers and the yellow-shirted Goodyear tyre technicians, Forghieri was under as much stress as the drivers out in the cars. Perhaps not as much stress as Lauda though, for Fittipaldi was making a concerted effort, and with 9/10 of the race distance covered, he passed the Austrian and took over second place. Di Montezemolo was counting the laps to the finish, for even if Lauda only finished third, the title would be his. Fittipaldi was showing his championship-winning skills, but he was in no position to beat Niki. The fans knew this, and when Regazzoni took the flag, it was a signal for an outpouring of Ferrari joy, while McLaren had to be happy with second best. Ferrari had not won here at Monza since Regazzoni's victory in 1970, but the real celebration was for the man in third place. Thanks to Niki Lauda, Scuderia Ferrari had its first World Drivers' Champion since John Surtees in 1964. That was the last year it had won the Constructors' title too, and everyone knows that to the team that designs, builds and maintains the cars that compete in Formula 1, that's the title that counts. There was one more Grand Prix, the United States event at Watkins Glen, and Lauda won that too, giving him a total of 5 wins in 14 races. Emerson Fittipaldi took second place, and the two drivers thus consolidated their World Championship positions. It had been a strange season, with 2 races shortened by force majeure and too many in which rain influenced the outcome. But for Niki Lauda and Ferrari, 1975 was a great year.